Hello, hello. Whoa! Oh my goodness, we're off to a really great start here.
Oh my god.
Hello. Everyone's back.
Hello everyone. Hello everyone.
Yeah, we need our microphone. Hang on a second. Sorry, guys. Oh my god, that's my kitty's tail.
If if we ever have an episode that starts without a technical malfunction
Well, we know Mercury is in retrograde. We know that.
for another 9
It's a full
days
moon.
Oh,
And it's
okay.
a full moon.
And it's a full moon.
to
Oh my god. Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Dark Shad-Bros. Last week, what? It took 6, 7, 25, I think it was, before we finally got the show up on its feet. So hopefully we're not going down that same road this time around. But it is nice to be back. And I am just one of your hosts, Peter Mack. I'm at a loss for words at the moment. Are we good now? We're good now. Okay, we're good now. And that I've got Wolfie here with me. Oh, wrong direction. There we go. Say hello, Wolfie. I've got my Willy Whacker with me.
you're
My Willy, in case I want to beat my manservant later on.
we have over 20 people watching us. Everyone is putting laugh emojis.
Thank you. We love our faithful fans who tune in every week, including across the pond. So for those of you who don't know me,
And in Europe.
and in Europe, yes, thank you, Rosen Island. Thank you. For those of you who don't,
Introduce Michael.
for those of you who don't know me, and there's absolutely no reason in this world why you should. My name is Peter Mack. I work primarily in musical theater and cabaret. I actually wrote a book, believe it or not, back in 2007, for which my dear friend Laura Parker did the forward, Cinema Salem, a cinematic guide to the Witch City, which I am currently, and where's Lamar? She's there on the bottom, right? There she is. Wait, let's bring her in. Yay! There's Miranda Duval there on the bottom of the book. I've written for the Huffington Post. I work primarily as a Judy Garland tribute artist. I created the original Golden Girls live stage show in 2003 and perform as a cadre of ladies, all live, no lip sync, as well as performing as myself. There's my just little itty-bitty bio out the gate. Enough of that. Now, let's swing it over to Michael Panzarotto. Wrong direction. There we go. Say hello, Michael.
Hello. Hello from Willy Whacker Free, Carroll County, Maryland. I am Michael Panzarotto. I am also an actor. You can see, I guess my claim to fame is playing Dr. Zachary Smith on Escape from Earth, Lost in Space. At least that's my baby. Huge Dark Shadows fan since time immemorial. Having a ball. So glad to be back with you. Hopefully without the gremlin this evening. But anyway, that's me. And now on to the brains of the outfit, the technical genius that is DJ. Sir?
DJ Mac Schaefer.
You know, I want to change our title credits now so that Michael, in a nod to Jonathan Harris, it'll say, and special guest star, Michael Panzarotto. So,
Oh my God. I would love
so yes, I'm Dr. John Mack / Schaefer, Peter's husband, together for 22 years. And really looking forward to this episode, discussing all things Daniel Meyer Cherkas. And that's it. Back to my hubby.
Well, it's good to be back. First of all, for those of you who are new to this, or perhaps regular visitors but have not done so, please like and subscribe on YouTube. Tonight we're actually going right to YouTube. Normally we can't do that because we have clips. I have been facing a PC memory space issue, and that is why we haven't had clips the last 2 weeks. Last week we were covering David Collins, and we could not have clips due to a memory issue. So we're working on getting clips back in because we know the audience members like to see them. But nonetheless, please hit like and subscribe, because this will be on the Dark Shad-Bros YouTube page, Peter Mack, and Mac and Chat. and everyone seems to visit the various pages to like and subscribe or leave comments. Leave comments, ask questions, whatever you like, please. But like and subscribe. It helps us a lot, and it doesn't cost you a thing.
So we welcome a new watcher, I guess we'll call them, a new audience member, Judy Alexander. Hello, Judy.
Hey, Judy, one of my favorite names in the whole wide world.
Yes, and then, of course, Adana, who never misses, which means it's 1 o'clock in the morning by her across the pond.
Across the pond. Hey, Adana.
Much love to you. And I've been corrected already. It is not Daniel Meyer Cherkas. It's Daniel Mayer Cherkas.
As in Louis B. Mayer.
All right, I apologize. Okay.
Yes. And that would be the full birth name for the man who became known worldwide as Dan Curtis, the man behind the shadows, who we are going to be discussing tonight. How has your week been going, Michael? We should start off with a little chit-chat.
It's been lovely. My oldest son has winged his way back to Arizona, to Tempe. So that was it was bittersweet. Happy for him, sort of sad for his mother and myself and his grandmother, who we had to scrape up off the floor.
Aww.
And Italian grandmothers. And then my youngest he's off to the Carolinas with his aunt and uncle and cousins. So he's away, so he's having a blast at the beach, and the rest is gravy. I mean, history. This is history. So anyway, been a lovely week. Ready to start a new one.
Have you watched any DS this week? Have you watched any DS?
Please. I am in, I parked in, yesterday and Friday, the episodes with, where Vicky is just back. From 1795.
Yep.
And I really like to go there. There's something about the dynamic in that moment where Barnabas is actually losing, even as a vampire, his grip on the ladies. Carolyn doesn't want it anymore because she's fond of the lawyer.
Tony Peterson.
And, of course, Vicky sees the Clark lookalike or the doppelganger or the many incarnations of that dear gentleman, and so she's breaking off the marriage, and Carolyn tells him she doesn't want to be pulled in anymore, and there's something super interesting and superhuman about that. Like, we all have been through that, where we've had those good moments that turn suddenly into a dry spell in the dating world or the relationship world, and you can feel that sense of panic because you've been there before. What's happening? Why am I losing my grip? Oh, we don't have the luxury of saying, oh, there's a spell working against me, but he did, and that worked, Yeah, you never know, I guess, the Maloik.
The Malocchia, yes.
The Malocchia.
Yes, because we're all Italian on this panel, so we know that.
That's right. So it could be that,
I was watching that when she does come back, and all of a sudden, it's everyone's like, you in the script. It must have been like just everybody ad lib, and you've got Julia going, I don't understand. I don't understand. It's impossible. I don't understand. Somebody help her to the couch. I don't understand. It's everybody, and then I love Roger. I saw this morning. I was watching that clip, and like Vicky is going on and on and on and about the past, and he just turns to Barnabas and says, Barnabas, you figure all of this out. And poor Barnabas is like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah. He's been through enough. He's already sweating she might finger him. And by that, I mean point the finger at.
He was hoping for the latter.
Mm-hmm.
We need to do a shout out to Cloud Lily. Welcome back to my favorite Dark Shad-Bros. Have an awesome episode.
Hello, Cloud Lily.
And
Cloud Lily.
She also wants us to know, so fabulous that we're doing a show on Dan Curtis.
Oh, well, you know what else, just on that Vicky's return, I love that Julia has really she's got Barnabas by the goyons.
Mm-hmm.
And she's lauding it over his head. Like, what does she say to him? You're always
in Vicky's room.
You're in
I love that
You're
part.
Vicky's room. But she goes, you're always in such control of things. It's kind of fun to see the way you react when you're not.
That's right.
She
That's right.
really sticks it to him.
What was it that Danny DeVito used to do? Yeah. He would pull the yeah, Yeah, exactly. She now is this is it's during this time period that she cut her hair and he suddenly decides to start being nice and he brings her hair up. Well, you've cut your hair. Everything about you has changed. It's
it had to
it is
be
interesting.
it had to be Leela because she was appalled when all of a sudden Maggie was blonde one day and then a brunette the next. She said to Mr. Curtis, it was a good segue, well, he walked into the rehearsal hall and he saw Catherine with her long chestnut brown ponytail and was like, I like your hair. Why are you wearing that stupid wig? And basically she's like, because you told me I had to, Dan. And Dan is like, nah, get rid of it. We're going to do this. And Leela Swift is like, Dan, you can't just have her blonde one day and then the next you're going to end. He's like, it's my show. I don't care.
Yeah, it worked.
It worked. Because when I brought it up to Catherine, I said, you're off for one episode, and Sam says, oh, Maggie had to leave early. She had a headache. And she comes back the next day with long brown hair, and Catherine laughed and said, because much better than an aspirin, Peter, is a trip to the beauty parlor.
Nice.
Yeah. But no explanation. None. Absolutely none.
Is that when the character started to soften up a little bit? Like Maggie went from being like the "I'll take you out and fight you" to
They kind of got rid of that Eve Arden, that
yeah.
Eve Arden thing. They kind of brought that down a little bit. She was still spunky. But she came off a lot older.
Yeah, she did. She did. What she said to Vicky when she said she was getting other than you're getting a job at Collinwood, and that makes you a jerk.
Yeah.
That's not the Maggie we all come to love. That's so it was a big change.
Yeah. That first episode. And I do like her. I do like those early Burke Devlin episodes because she has a lot of great back and forth with Mitch Ryan.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, that I think that sums up Dan Curtis, who is the topic of conversation today, perfectly. That was his stock answer. It's my show. I can do whatever I want. There's a light switch in 1790. They're not looking at that. They're looking at the story. They're not going to see that. They're not. Yeah. That was his stock answer for all of these inconsistencies.
Right.
Which we've talked about many times, just one-on-one.
It's a very dad answer, and by dad answer is I used to see things like that, or say, why this, why that, or and my father would say it's simple, it's not in the script, and move on. That's the difference between, I guess, what they call, and I don't know if this is a good thing that they say or bad, but fanboys, fanatics, fans, and the people who are like Dan Curtis was a sports-minded guy. So, like, the ethereal world didn't really register, I don't think, although he enough to get it going, but those those tiny nuances and things like that, those details, just it doesn't really matter. So yeah, he's an interesting guy, very interesting character.
Very, 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 very interesting. And if you haven't seen it, guys, for those who are watching, check out the documentary Dan Curtis, Master of Dark Shadows. It's a great documentary. There's a bunch of really cool bonuses on the Blu-ray and DVD, including Art Wallace's The House, which was done twice. They've only been able to locate one version, but it was what they used as the story for Elizabeth and Carolyn. This woman who never leaves the house because she believes she's killed her husband and buried him in the basement. Except everything is in reverse. I think it's the mother is Caroline and the daughter is Elizabeth. So the names were reversed. And they did a reading of it at one of the festivals. I think it was in Tarrytown, where Marie Wallace and David Selby played. I think David Selby was the blackmailer, the Jason McGuire part, and Marie was the Joan Bennett part. But in the Unfound,
And which came first, the house?
the house. So when they were putting the story together, I think Dan might have said, like, I liked that, thing that you did there. Why don't we incorporate that? Because in those days, no one ever expected this stuff to ever be seen again.
Right.
And they've only found one version of the house. And I want to find the other version because Frances Sternhagen plays the Carolyn Stoddard role in that.
Oh, wow.
Who I love. Frances, you've all seen Frances Sternhagen. We just lost her, I think, a year ago.
Just this year.
Yeah, she just passed away. She did everything. Lived to a ripe old age. But yeah, in that second version of the house. But Dan incorporated that into Dark Shadows with Elizabeth and Carolyn, which was a really good plot point. Apparently, he was.
Sternhagen was Cliff Clavon's mother, right?
Yes.
Yes.
On Cheers. Okay. All right.
Yep.
And the nasty mother-in-law in Sex and the City.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
But very good friends with one of our the ladies we love, Michael. She was very good friends with Marion Seldes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I love Marion Seldes.
Yeah.
I love me some Marion.
I wonder if Marion ever auditioned for Dark Shadows. She would have been perfect.
Oh, yeah.
She would have. She would have lent herself very well to Dark Shadows.
That's a great question.
Holy how they would have missed that.
Now, as far as Mr. Curtis is concerned, he was a salesman, apparently. Like down to nothing in the bank, I believe. Like he had Zip, and he had a little office. I'm trying to remember if this was the one near Carnegie Hall, where it was. They called it the penthouse, but I think he had to go out on the fire escape to get up and get into his office. Stacks of unpaid bills. He said, I was only paying the stuff I knew they would turn off. Because he had 3 kids.
$10,000 worth of bills or something?
$10,000 worth of bills. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But only pay the electric, pay the whatever, and everything. That was it. And that's when he came up with the golf classics for CBS.
And he pitched it a couple times to a couple networks, right? And they downed it. They turned it down.
I believe so.
He made an offer, and he said something, and the offer wasn't enough. So he and his wife wanted to kill him, but he got it.
Yeah, Norma, who apparently they really were like, I don't want to say codependent, but they were very, very. I think Norma was his bedrock. That's the impression I get, that they were very, very joined at the hip.
You're wearing your glasses this episode?
I'm wearing my glasses and getting a little shine from my...
It looks like Little Orphan Annie.
Yeah, I know.
I keep trying to...
I could do my Count Patoffi,
Oh, right.
Right.
Those Coke bottle glasses. But the story goes that he was meeting with Leonard Goldberg at ABC to discuss a nighttime show. And the night before, he has this dream about a young dark-haired girl on a train reading a letter, how she's been hired to be a governess at an old English estate, and gets there, and as the door opened to the mansion, he woke up. And he told his wife, and his wife was like, I like it. You should actually mention this to Leonard today. So they're talking about the project that, whatever it was, pardon me, they were supposed to do. And said, do you have any other ideas? He said, well, kind of. And he starts telling Leonard, and Leonard's like, wait a minute. You're telling me the story of Jane Eyre. And Dan's like, what's Jane Eyre? He's like, well, it's an old classic kind of gothic novel. Is anybody doing it for TV? No, Dan. Well, then shut the, and let me tell you the thing here. And that's apparently how Dark Shadows was born. But Dan wanted to do it as a nighttime show. And Leonard said, I think we should do it as a daytime show. So they argued back and forth, back and forth. And he said, what kind of an order can you give me? What kind of a cycle? And he said, one cycle, 13 weeks. And Dan said, not enough. I need 26. Leonard said, you got it. They shook hands, and that was it. That's how deals are made.
So hold off on Leonard Goldberg for a second. We want to welcome one new fan who's caught all of our episodes, but this is his first live stream.
Nick! Oh, Nick, I've loved seeing you with Penny. Penny Dreadful, Terror at Collinwood. Don't miss Penny. I just watched her episode about the 1991 series. Wonderful episode. And that was her 91st episode. That's why she did the 1991 series. And Nick has been a guest star on her show several times. So thank you so much for joining.
Join our panel sometime, Nick.
Yeah, come on.
All right.
As long as Penny doesn't mind.
We love Penny.
Yes. Check out Terror at Collinwood, guys.
And then we have another new fan, Kathy Togue. She wanted us to know that Dan lived on Iranistan and Laurel Canyon, and she ran home every day to watch DS, and thank you. So, hey, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy. We love meeting our new fans.
Leonard Goldberg, when he talked about getting the phone call from Dan Curtis for a meeting, he said, you didn't say no to Dan Curtis. That he was a shorter of stature, but a very, for lack of a better word, imposing. So he took the meeting on that alone. So, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your Leonard
Well,
Goldberg.
no, it's true. I mean, Dan was, I don't know his exact height, but everyone said he was very hulking. I mean, he was broad. He was, I mean, he almost had like a football player's build.
Are we saying he's Peter Mac height?
And what height would that be?
Your resume height?
What height would that be?
Your
Oh, my resume height, 5'8"? 5'8"? Yeah, we'll go with that.
Which makes me 6'1".
We'll go with 5'8".
Sure.
Mine too.
And all teeth. Apparently, Dan Curtis, like they called him piano teeth.
That's all I know.
Great smile.
Well, yeah, I think you referred to, was that what you said the other day, Dr. Teeth?
Dr. Teeth.
Dr.
Yep,
Teeth.
Dr. Teeth. Let's go with Dr. Teeth. Yep. Yes, sir.
But, I mean, it was interesting because nothing like this had ever been done before. Not this kind of a daytime serial. I mean, I'm sure there were Studio Ones and Playhouse 90s that retold Gothic stories, but, you know, when was there ever a Gothic with the inclination of a horror storyline in this kind of underbelly? This really was cutting edge. So we have to, I don't want to say I badmouth Dan Curtis a lot. I sometimes feel like I'm Dan bashing, and I don't mean to because I respect and adore the man. But I think he could be too much of a hard hat, but we'll get to that later on. But this really was cutting edge. He insisted that they had a full orchestra. They were not going to use cheesy organ music the way all soap operas of the time did. He hired one of the best scenic designers, Cy Thomasoff. And he also insisted that they go out on location and get great exterior shots that they could use in tandem with the storylines and to represent the houses.
All stuff that makes the show what we love. You know, the housing, the shots, the house, the sets, you know, all that he was dead on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I've said the houses, just like the music, they became another character in the show. All of those houses are so iconic.
Beyond any shadow of a doubt. They are, I think that's one of the things that shot the movie, was they only had the great house. It looked like the gray house, but where was the old house? Where was Rose Cotton? The things that everybody thought was so insanely wild about Dark Shadow weren't there. So yeah, he and the orchestra thing, that was music is huge, huge, and the Dark Shadow's music is so freaking memorable. Such an intense memory for everybody. The music box, the the eerie music that was always playing when Laura Parker was casting a spell.
Yes.
That kind of thing. All the stuff that made the show stand out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to the point of hiring, even though she wasn't the director out the gate, the fact that he supported Leela Swift, who was one of the first female full-time directors, certainly on a series,
Well, no, she was there from day one.
but not as director from day one. Who was the director of record from day one? The gentleman.
Well, they all. I mean, they had a cadre of directors. It was Leela, Henry Kaplan, and Peter Miner. And I think there were a couple of others in there as well that their names have escaped me at the moment. But Leela said at the Paley Center reunion that people were kind of against her. And I guess Dan said, he kind of looked at them and he looked at her and he said, "Nah, I like that broad."
Sounds like him.
Yeah. And I think even when they were doing the movie, she was kind of like his right-hand man, so to speak, in terms of being there for him. And because Sam Hall said the first day of filming, it was a scene with Grayson that Grayson was involved in. And he just stood there and he said, "Well, shoot." And Grayson was like, "You're supposed to say action, Dan." But he was nervous. He had never done a major motion picture before. Everything was for television. So, he had a lot riding on it.
Was it his secretary that said that he was actually, as hard as he came off and as tough, was actually a very vulnerable kind of guy, and that she said he was in one meeting where his collar had turned up. He was sweating so bad in a meeting with somebody from nerves, and then he wept in the car when they said he couldn't go back on the set for the golf series. He wept in the car on the way home. He was so upset by the whole.
Oh wow!
So there was a sense of vulnerability to the guy that was kind of surprising to hear about. Well, actually, very surprising to hear about. But
Well, when ABC said you've got to get rid of Mitch Ryan, he cried. He was apparently bawling like a baby the day that Mitch was. They said, "Yeah, we can't do this," and he really. I think he and Mitch were probably kindred spirits. I think they were very, very similar type of guys.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Tough talking. I would say drinking buddies. Because Mitch, by his own admission, did have an alcohol problem, and that's why he was fired.
And he also had an eye for younger talent behind the scenes. And he certainly loved to work with New Yorkers. Tell the George DiCenzo story.
Well, just what you say about casting, something that when he was asked about casting against type, and he said, "I never cast against type. I cast right on the nose. I'm the greatest." He said, "I'm the greatest cliche that ever lived." Everyone we cast in Dark Shadows was right on, and it's true. I mean, if you look at Joan Bennett as Elizabeth, Jonathan Frid is it's kind of a mixed bag, because there are so many apocryphal stories about the fact that he sent back the wrong photo from England, and it was not that Jonathan was not the actor that he wanted. Although Dan maintained that the photo was a photo of a guy on stage in a cape, and he said, "Let's get the guy with the cape." So there's all kinds of apocryphal stories about that. I know he languished over Victoria Winters. He said it was the hardest role to cast out the gate.
Well,
That's
really?
interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's in, because we got the Bible here. We have Art Wallace's Bible, which people were asking about during the David Collins episode, Shadows on the Wall by Art Wallace. It's 91 pages, and it's the original story trajectory. If the show had not gone the route that it went, it's really interesting to read, and the character descriptions. But I think, is that in here or not? It's in one of these books. It may not be this one, where you can see that they were really cutting it close with casting. And where not everybody, and I think Alexandra's name is not in the sheet. They still had not found Vicky Winters yet. That it was really coming down to the wire.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But he did have a great eye. He really did have a great eye for all of these people. I mean, the original Matthew Morgan, George Mitchell, even though I prefer Thayer David, George Mitchell was wonderful in the role.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very different kind of... I don't necessarily know that we would have bought George Mitchell holding her hostage, because she could have blown on him and he would have fallen over. They needed that hulking...
Yeah. Menacing kind of guy. Mm-hmm. That is true. I've never seen a more perfectly cast series from start to finish all the way down.
Although, interestingly enough, some of the early casting choices were not so great. And then when they recast, they did a great job. So we go from Mark Allen as Sam Evans, who's very one note, very tipsy. I'm going to say this at the risk of taking my lashes, that I think he might have been really tipsy on the set. He was just kind of a sad sack. He didn't have the layers that David Ford brought to the part. And I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I believe some of the ladies said that he was a little handsy.
Oh dear.
So that was also, I think, an issue with Mark Allen. But David Ford was a great replacement. James Hall, I know James Hall is on some of the boards, and a very sweet man, but it seemed destined for fate that Johnny Carlin would wind up playing Willie Loomis, and apparently, Carlin and Curtis became friends really, really fast. Again, they were very much on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else that was... Do you know of anybody? I know they considered Bert Convey for Barnabas, which would have been a huge mistake, but who else? Do you know of any other kind of choices or that he mulled about for anybody else?
It's interesting. This came up on a board recently, and I know Mary O'Leary had to, who produced the Jonathan Frid documentary,
Mm-hmm.
because somebody did a mock-up of Convey in the costume and the portrait, and the poster said, he was Dan's original choice for the role. He was only submitted for the role. I think, Linda Otto and Marion Doherty, who were the casting directors, took the description of a dark-haired, dark-eyed, brooding, handsome leading man that would appeal to housewives. And he certainly fit into that criteria.
Fit the bill.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But Frid, when Frid went into the audition, he said, here I looked around and there were all these cadavers, and lo and behold, I out-cadavered them all. I don't know what that says about me.
Thank God.
Yeah.
I heard an interesting thing in the I rewatched the documentary on Mr. Curtis, and I thought it was fascinating that they said he was always reading, always searching, always looking for the next best thing. And he had a true entrepreneurial spirit. Like, he really always wanted that next thing, the next gig. Let's keep moving on to the next project, So that kind of fascinated me. I thought that was fairly interesting.
Well, then he would also, they hired a speed reader because they would get truckloads of books. His assistant, Ruth Kennedy, who worked on the New Dark Shadows as well, the 91 series, she would be over in England, and he'd say, whatever you can, send over, and she'd be bringing back, God only knows what they charged her in customs, for these bags and bags of books about the occult and myths and folklore and legends. And they would hire a speed reader to go through to see if there was anything they could use for the show.
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
But
That is super interesting.
yeah. And very hard on the writers. We can talk about that a little bit later on. But, the show wasn't going anywhere. And I don't necessarily blame the show for that, because I maintain that first year gets a bad rap. I enjoy it. I think it heats up very fast. It's only 70 episodes in before we get our first ghost when we see Josette. But he went to Leonard Goldberg to have a meeting, and he's like, "You're going to can me, aren't you?" And he's like, "More than likely, yeah, it's not doing well." And he said, "Then let me take the lid off." And he's like, "Okay, what do you mean by that?" "Well, we keep talking about the fact that the house is haunted. Let's just go for it. And just throw in a ghost." And he's like, "All right, if you want to do that, just as long as it doesn't go against standards and practices and they say you can't do it." And Curtis said, "They'll say I can't do it, but let me do it anyway."
Nick Caputo brings up something very interesting.
Nick, let's hear it from Nick.
That we've talked about many times before. It's astonishing how much control Curtis had. In later years, a swarm of executives would have been interfering, rejecting, and watering down the show.
Yeah.
We agree with you, Nick.
Totally agreed, Nick. Yeah, they really gave him a free hand. I think that was the great thing about those days, Nick, is that you didn't get too much interference. I mean, unless you were going to do something that would have been unseemly. Bordering on pornographic or, that kind of a thing. But they seemed to leave them alone. I think also because ABC was the low man on the totem pole. It was CBS, NBC, and ABC. I'm pretty sure it was in that order. But bringing in Jonathan, bringing in Barnabas was really blowing the lid off the pot. And that was his kids. I mean, for those of you out there who don't know this story, when the ratings were going down, they were the impetus. They were like, "Daddy, why don't you make it scarier? You're only talking about the ghosts. Why don't you show the ghosts?" So it really was the Curtis daughters that we have to thank for saying, "Come on, let's see these ghosts." And that's how that really was the impetus for bringing in Josette and Bill Malloy and onward and onward and onward. So I love the idea that this guy just thought, "Listen, I've got nothing else to lose if you're going to cancel me. Let's just go for it."
Really quickly, I want to say hello to Barbara Arnold. Much love to you, Barb.
Hey, Barb.
Hope you're doing great.
Hi, Barbara.
And then Carrie Perwicka. Hi, guys. Glad to catch up on another live. Carrie, thank you for never missing our show. Much love to you.
Yes.
But Jonathan Frid, sorry.
Oh, yeah. So the vampire was and George DiCenzo, who I got to meet. He was an executive producer on the show, and he said in an interview, "I didn't know what the hell it meant then, and I still don't know what the hell it means now, to be an associate producer." But he lied his way into the gig. He had a meeting with Curtis, and he said, I prevailed upon all my... Did he go to Yale too? I think he was Yale drama as well.
Oh, please hope.
I think he was Yale, like Jonathan. I think he was Yale drama as well. And he said, "What are they paying you?" And he lied about his salary. Totally up to salary. And Curtis was like, "I'll pay you double that. Fuck them. Come over and work for me. I need somebody on the inside." And he said that was the only time his Yale drama acting held him in good stead.
That's wild. You know what's been fascinating to me, just as a sort of a nod to Mr. Curtis's genius, is that we're talking about a series that was a soap opera as though it were a primetime series, like a major. If you think about it, I mean, that in and of itself is quite a feat. That it's being, that it's there are so many more panels for this series that was a soap. You don't have Guiding Light nighttime chat shows, or they may have boards here and there, or even hell, Dallas. But Dark Shadows is being discussed, on a Sunday evening and Wednesday nights, and
Yeah.
boards, and that takes some doing. That's a hell of a genius on his, thinking on his part. So he did have a talent.
And it's certainly the genius of the show, to your point. But you also have to remember that, to Peter's point earlier, Dan is responsible for not only introducing the first horror gothic serial to TV,
And he didn't like it called horror, by the way.
but
He would say it's got scary elements, but it's gothic. It's gothic, and it's true. It really is more terror.
mm-hmm.
Dark Shadows, the series, it really is more of a terror show because it depended more on atmosphere.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the point I was going to make was that it really paved the way for other horror anthology kind of shows. Certainly the work that he did on TV, Night Stalker, etc. But then, fast forward to the 90s and Passion and all of those kinds of things. So anyway.
No. And go ahead, Michael.
Well, it's funny that you should say that, because I was going to say, I was thinking about this today. My childhood, a lot of the things that really horrified me were the Hammer films, and then Night Stalker, Trilogy of Terror. Even Jack Palance's Dracula was very violent, very, very rough, very, very hardcore, kind of frightening to me as a child. So, like Dan Curtis, that's all Dan Curtis. He had an eye.
What was the scariest?
And as you say, he paved the way.
Michael, what was the scariest movie you ever saw before you were 18, let's say?
Oh, God. Well, as a little boy, honestly, the Night Stalker, for the scene when he crushed the Doberman. When she let the Doberman out of the car and he crushes the Doberman. And then, honest to God, Creepshow, my Aunt Maria came home and the whole family was together, and we were in the basement and the kids all watched Creepshow. And the one that I wanted to see, I missed, because I had the comic book. And I missed Father's Day. I was in the pool, and then I came in in time for the damn crate. And I really think that traumatized me. That was quite awful. So the Creepshow, I would say, was probably, but the Night Stalker, when he did it, the Doberman end, there was something very, very frightening about that. And the fight at the end. I mean, Carl almost didn't win. He had a real struggle killing Janos. So that was a very scary.
It still holds up.
He was throwing people around. Yes, exactly so. So
mine will come as
Mine
will come as no surprise to those who know me. Growing up Roman Catholic Italian, and Peter will tell me that I still have guilt issues. But Carrie, hands down, I still cannot watch that movie. Especially the scenes between her, Carrie, and Piper Laurie, the mother. Oh my God. What about you, Peter? What was the scariest that you saw before you were 18?
Oh God, I was never really affected all that much because I just loved spooky stuff. I'm trying to think of something that I had to turn off. I'll tell you what I did turn off the first time. It was the credits. It was Rosemary's Baby.
Oh.
My mom rented that for me, and that.
Oh yeah.
The credits and that, la 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 la, whatever the hell it is.
That song.
And I was like, this is freaking me out. And I shut it off.
Wow.
I went back to it the next day because
Yeah.
I'm like this is really freaking me out. So yeah, Rosemary's Baby, just the opening credits,
Wow.
totally freaked me out.
Sorry to derail our Dan
How
Curtis conversation.
DJ? How brilliant was it? Did you see the episode of Frasier where they used Piper Laurie to play the mother
I love
for
her.
I can never Christine, what is her? I can never think of her name, but she played her. She was like a Dr. Laura character, and they brought that mother was Piper Laurie. Brilliant was
So good.
that? So yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Now bringing it back to Mr. Frid coming into the show.
Mm.
Yeah, I also need to point something out, and again coming into
Oh, we have a new somebody watching us. Hey B, hey B. My scary show that I saw in the third grade was Taste the Blood of Dracula.
oh, good flick. Haven't seen it in a while, but
Dracula, Christopher Lee.
good flick. Very good
Yes,
flick. Yeah, Hammer, Hammer again. So much of it is Hammer. Um,
And then Barbara Arnold, her two Salem's Lot and The Exorcist. Okay, sorry. Back to our show.
Oh,
Jonathan Frid. Sorry.
Jonathan Barnabas. Well, one of Dan's shortcomings seems to be, and he was human like we all are. He didn't quite seem to give credit to the writers the way he should have, and he's not unique in show business in that regard. But the show would not be the show that it was. He had wonderful ideas, but he had good writers, and especially that initial writing team. Ron Sproat, Joe Caldwell, Malcolm Marmelstein. Frances Swan did not last that long because most of her episodes were the soap sudsy ones. So whenever I look, and I was saying to one of our friends recently, when you watch an episode that you really like, go to see who wrote that episode. Because you'll be amazed to see a pattern and saying, oh, like the ones I really like were written by so and so. And I think one of his top writers was Malcolm Marmelstein, who also wrote a movie called Escape from Witch Mountain,
Oh, right.
and one of my favorite Disney films, Pete's Dragon.
oh wow.
Yeah, Malcolm is the one who came up with Laura, even though she was part of the Bible and there was going to be a custody battle. He said, I noticed in looking at the trajectory of the story that she came from Phoenix, Arizona. And I thought, why don't we make her a Phoenix?
Brilliant.
And Dan was like, what the hell is that?
Absolutely brilliant.
It's a being that becomes reborn from the flame. And great, But I just feel like Dan was never too couth about giving the writers their due. I know he and Sam Hall had a tumultuous relationship.
Art Wallace, obviously.
Malcolm was unceremoniously fired when he went off to California for a vacation and was turning in his scripts. I think he was let go somewhere just after they went into the color episodes, and after Anthony George had taken over as Burke Devlin. He was on his way back home from California, and his agent said, well, you don't need to come home because you're fired. And he's like, why? He said, because they said they're not using your scripts. They're unusable. And he's like, I'm watching the show. They are using my scripts. And apparently there was a personality conflict between him and Robert Costello, who was one of the executive producers. And for some reason, Robert wanted him out. And I don't know why Dan didn't, because I think we lost a lot of good, not that the show didn't have good story, but a lot of the episode where Barnabas talks about Josette's death, that monologue is Malcolm Marmelstein, and it's fucking brilliant.
The black and white, right? Where he's
Yeah.
playing Carolyn and Victoria. Okay.
Yep, that's Malcolm. Yep.
That is absolutely brilliant. That's an iconic scene in the series.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a go-to. It's a go-to.
But he, basically thought, okay, I'm still on probation here, so I'll think of the scariest thing I can think of from my childhood, and that was Bela Lugosi as Dracula. We'll just bring a vampire onto the show. 13 weeks. The doctor will figure out he's a vampire. They'll put a stake in his heart, and we'll go out with a bang. And that's what was supposed to happen. But he wanted Count Dracula. His own words were, he's a marauder. He's Count Dracula. He's not a nice guy. And he was in England doing pre-production for Jekyll and Hyde with Jack Palance, which, by the way, was supposed to be Jason Robards.
Really?
Yeah. Jason Robards had been cast,
Shit.
who I adore, another great
Oh, yeah.
actor, but I don't know if there was a personality conflict. So Robards was out and Palance was in.
House Without a Christmas Tree.
One of our go-to holiday movies, yep. And he's getting these headshots and said, here, I see this, this picture of a guy on stage I can barely see, but he's wearing a cape. And I say, get the one with the cape.
And there she wrote.
And, and
So what was the influence of Dan on the writers for changing the arc of Barnabas from a marauder to the real first reluctant vampire? Is there a noticeable trajectory change? Week 2, week 3 of the 13 weeks? What was kind of the arc there?
So again, he was in England and he wasn't there. And then Jonathan, he was preempted his start date because of, I believe, a writer's strike or some kind of a strike. And so they decided to have a meeting. Now, for those of you who are not aware of this, Jonathan didn't want the role. He had just come back from Florida. He had told his agent previously, don't submit me for anything because I'm going back to California, where he had been touring with Ray Milland in Hostile Witness and or Lost Weekend, one of the two. And I'm going to teach. I've submitted. I want to be a teacher. So don't submit me for anything. And just to shorten the story, gets back to New York, having told nobody that he's there, puts the key, drops his bag, puts the key in the door, the phone rings, he runs inside, picks up the phone, and it's his agent. And he's like, George, how did you know? He said, I didn't know you. I just took a chance. And he's like, well, what's going on? Well, I told you I'm not interested. He said, but you're not leaving next week, right? No, I'm going to be here for a couple of weeks. He's like, well, maybe you could pick up a couple of bucks, some seed money to take with you to California. And Jonathan's take on it was, I got the role because I really didn't want it.
Interesting.
I just went to appease my agent, and that was it. But Ron Sproat was one of the head writers. They had gone to Yale together. Ron knew what he was capable of. So when they had this meeting prior to him starting the preemption, he's like, I don't want to play a one-note monster. I don't want to do Bela Lugosi. I think he's a man with a conflict. He's an alcoholic. He's got this secret that is so... if anybody finds out... And truly, Barnabas is a man besieged by fate. We find out eventually anyway. He didn't ask for this curse. So he's like, that's what I'd like to play. Is he's got this addiction that he has to fight. He really doesn't want to do it. And they went with it, and they all agreed it was a good idea, except for Mr. Curtis, who was appalled when he came back and found out the direction the character was going in. All of these, longing stares, which a lot of which were at the teleprompter. That's no secret. But this kind of underlying subtext of him being sad and lonely and lost in a time that he knows nothing of.
Yeah. Wow. Deep-dyed, snarling villainy gets boring, baby.
What
We've seen that.
now? It's interesting because Michael does a killer Jonathan Harris tribute, and it's a very similar situation, but a little bit in the reverse. Jonathan Harris didn't want to get fired, if
Yeah.
I've got this right, and thought, oh my God, 5 episodes and they're going to kill me because it's a
Exactly.
one-note villain. So he added a comedic
Yeah.
lovableness, and that's but the creator liked it, right? Irwin Allen went,
I was just going to
more.
say, Irwin Allen. Yep, Irwin Allen told him, do more. I know what you're doing. And well, actually, one of the writers came up to him first and said, you ain't fooling me. I know what you're doing. And he said, well, come in. Let's sit down. He said, no, I don't want to talk about it. And he walked out of the room. And then later on, Irwin said, do more. And so he gave him carte blanche, whereas Curtis leaned on Jonathan Frid, which was would have been a huge mistake if I mean, like I said, I watch these scenes when Barnabas is still dark, when I'm in a bad mood, and I wish I could just beat the hell out of somebody or psychically torture them for a few months on end, like he did Julia. But even then, now that we've seen the show, we've had these discussions about the PTSD aspect. It's forgivable because of the trauma that he would have endured that we didn't know about at first. So it's not as boring when you see he's working toward. And what I have to say I really respect about the show at that point with the turn is that it's mentioned. The change is mentioned. Like with Lost in Space, it was sort of just dropped. Never did they say, well, a few moments ago you were not only a murderous spy, but you had a lot of intellect and all of that, and now you're screaming and yelling. It was very ignored. Whereas Vicky calls Barnabas out. The story you told me about Jeremiah and Josette was not how it happened. And Barnabas himself, quite a few times, says, I was not kind to my family. I didn't treat my family well. And Willie says how terrified, what if we open this coffin and he's like he was? What if we... And I have to admire the writers and the show for taking that on and not just doing the easy thing and ignoring it and moving forward. They really did, acknowledged it. So I think that was, brilliant of them. But yeah, it was a little bit different with Jonathan, but the same sort of thing. The Jonathans had similar stories. The two Jonathans in my life.
Well, Nick Caputo is pointing out in the comments that imagine if Jonathan hadn't have had that meeting with the writers. We would not be talking about this show today.
No.
Oh, no. Oh,
No.
God, no.
No, and if Bert Convy, and if everybody goes after Mr. Convy, and by all accounts, he was a very sweet man.
Right, sweet guy.
Nice guy, and not a bad actor. He was not, I don't think he had the depth that Jonathan had. He was a matinee idol, good looking.
What I will say about Bert Convy is that he's the original Perchik in Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway. And they cut his number out of town because they felt he wasn't very dynamic. So I know we love the Bert Convy of the TV host and all that kind of stuff, but there was a precedent to his not being particularly dynamic. Pretty recent. I mean, Fiddler on the Roof is rather close to when this casting would have happened.
Yeah, 64, I think, is Fiddler on the Roof. So, 3 years. 3 years. Yeah. No, I think if anybody else had played the part, I think the show probably would have gone, or maybe they would have gotten to one more storyline. Frid would teeter. There is an archive of television interview where Frid says, and he's more in his dotage at this point, and says, Dan really didn't like me. He really was not fond of me because he didn't like what I was doing with the character. And we fought all the time. He said the only time Dan ever won out was with the movie. He said because in House of Dark Shadows, he said Barnabas is almost like a second agent to the plot. He's not what he is in the television series.
Don't you think too? I think it was Miss Parker who said, I'm pretty sure it was her. She said that you need theater actors to pull off those characters, and particularly like with Barn. I mean, Jonathan Frid had a very a natural, like he was Vincent Price. Like Vincent Price had a very naturally urbane, kind of smooth, suave demeanor, and Jonathan Frid had a very courtly demeanor. Even when he wasn't playing Barnabas, he had that very kind of, the way he spoke and the way he moved and all of that was so graceful. And he had that Shakespearean actor's depth. Like plucking anybody to play Gandalf would have been a huge mistake. You know, Ian McKellen added layers to the character that I feel sorry for the next guy who has to play the part, or General Von Trapp. You know, these guys have layers to them because of their theater experience that made the character, you know, absolutely theirs. So that was a good choice.
Totally. Yeah, he said they fought all the time, and as a matter of fact, Malcolm related that they were on their way to, I believe, to a story meeting with ABC, and he said to Malcolm, you know, blah, 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 blah. And of course we're going to kill off Barnabas, and Malcolm's like, I beg your pardon? He's like, yeah, we're going to kill Barnabas off. And he's like, but Dan, Barnabas is what has saved the show. Yeah, I know, but I've got a ghost story I want to do. And then he's like, and you know, and apparently they go to ABC, and ABC is like, you realize the only reason you have a show is because of Barnabas Collins. Malcolm plays mediator and says, you know what? I think we can keep Barnabas for a while more, and we can still pursue this ghost story that Dan wants to do, which I believe was the house by the sea that Vicky finds. That's the ghost story.
Interesting.
I was going to ask if it was Quentin. Okay, all right. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and he said, of course, we all remember that story because it didn't go anywhere. You know, all of a sudden it was like there for a minute, and then it was
the pissing contest, and then it went on.
Nick Caputo brings up an interesting point, and he says, do you think Curtis ever got or appreciated what Frid brought to the show? Well, we certainly know in later years, in the Talking Head stuff that Dan did, he said we wouldn't have had a show if it wasn't for Jonathan. Whether or not he actually got it is I guess we'll never know kind of thing.
Begrudgingly
got it.
Nick, I think it was very begrudgingly, because again, with the movie, he was determined he was going to have that Count Dracula, and that's what he got. There are traces. Poor Sam Hall and Gordon Russell, you can see they're trying to get that other Barnabas in there as much as they can.
Especially that Grayson Jonathan scene.
Yes.
Where I know who you are kind of thing. You could see his...
And even where he goes to Carolyn and says, you're not to go near Todd again. Not only are you to touch Todd again, you're not to touch anyone at Collinwood.
Yeah.
So that shows, again, that sympathetic side, but it's little glimmers, because you go, well, why the hell did they ever have him attack Carolyn to begin with?
Yeah.
Carl wants to point out, and we've said this too, that Jonathan won that war because he did not do Night of Dark Shadows, and we know what happened there.
We'll get to that, Carl. We're going to get to Night of Dark Shadows. Totally going to get to that. But yeah, Nick, I think it was begrudging. And when they did the 91 series, obviously he realized he had to keep the romantic hero thing, but he's more feral. Penny Dreadful, Danielle points this out. There's a lot of snarling. You know, she's like, that's the one thing with Ben Cross I didn't like. And watch Jack Palance in Dracula. The lovely girl that guested on Penny's show brings this up. He's stealing shots from Dracula for the 91 Dark Shadows, where you have Ben Cross outside the window snarling Jack Palance is doing the same thing in Dracula.
Yeah.
So Curtis would always steal from himself, but I still think that Ben managed to get
Oh yeah.
that Frid thing in there, making him sympathetic, like where he goes to attack Willie, and then a moment later, then he caresses his face,
Says
and
you're a good friend.
pats him on the shoulder. It's so they did get that in there.
Yeah, they. I think you're. I said that before about Cross's Barnabas is a good deal more fierce than our Barnabas. I mean, our Barnabas had moments when he beats Willie and all of that, but Ben's is the hissing, and it's funny because you mentioned Jack Palance because Christopher Plummer in his autobiography talks about how hissing was an actual part of Jack Palance's natural speech. When Jack would speak, or even the way he breathed, he said he was always very snake-like. Like he would actually hiss and make those kind of noises. So it's interesting because that's very Jack Palance, whereas it's not at all Jonathan Frid, and it is obvious in the. There is like when Angelique appears to Ben Cross after he's bitten Abigail. And and I love those scenes when she's hovering over him. I think those were great when she would come back as a ghost, but he would hiss back at her, and that I know exactly. You're exactly right. He is more feral, and it is not something you would see our Barnabas do. He had that great stage like when he cuts the portrait of Angelique.
Oh yes,
burn. It's very staged, like it's very Shakespearean, So
totally.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But even Frid, there's an interview with him. He was in Boston the night the new show premiered, and doing a Q&A after his show, and he said, someone asked about his career, and he said, where was it going? And he said, well, we'll see after tonight. He said, I hope this thing goes on for a while because it's, basically say it's going to help me if it does. But he points out, I think that Ben Cross is going along with Dan a little more than I did. He's going to be a little more rough around the edges. So he seems to be going along with Dan's vision rather than mine. So,
it's the whole the whole popcorn movie thing, like you're seeing now in films, which we love, the Marvel films and all of that. It's a popcorn movie, right? You go, you enjoy it, the screaming and hollering. Mr. Curtis, in a lot of ways, feels like that. Like I was writing a thing one time about a vampire story, and my father said, "Why don't you make this movie where Dracula's spirit inhabits this android like the Terminator?" And I said, "Dad, that is ridiculous. That is not at all gothic, or that's silly." But it's that kind of like not a gothic horror fan hero like we are. It's the average guy, thinking of a really cool, violent horror. It's the two differences. Whereas you've got an actor who takes every role so seriously and plays poles in each character. He plays a different pole, and he's developing something. And the producer's like, "I want blood, I want guts, I want boobs, I want tits and teeth," that kind of thing. As opposed to, the actual thoughtful, thing. So you can so see that in the two.
And the innovation too, bringing it back to Dan's innovation, where he then said, "All right, now, how do I keep this going?
Yeah.
How do we keep this going?" And he's like, the audience must be wondering how he became a vampire. Clearly, he was not always a vampire. We made references to that. We would get little tidbits of the story, but they would come in the middle of the conversation where he would be talking to Julia in the mausoleum or wherever. And we never quite got the whole story. And it's to Dan's credit to say, all right, let's go back into the past and figure out what this guy was like when he was human and how he got this way. And a lot of people are mixed up that Sam was a writer on the show. Grayson was brought in. Now, this is hysterical. I was watching this clip the other day. Dr. Woodard is going over Maggie Evans' blood samples with Burke Devlin. And poor Mitch, this was obviously a day where he had been knocking him back a little bit. Yeah. He was feeling no pain. And he's like, well, I've sent them off. I've sent them off to Dr. Julian Hoffman. You know, he's the best man in his field. Oh. And they're going on and on about he, him, you know. And this goes on for like 2 episodes. Curtis claimed that he met her at a party. And he said, look at that face. She's got to be on the show. And then there was a meeting where somebody said, Julia, true.
Oh my
true.
God.
Somebody said Julia jokingly, and Dan said, that's it. We'll make her a woman. And Leela said, but you've already introduced him as a man. And he said, who cares? It's my show.
God love him for that, because there could not be another. Nobody else could have played that the way.
Nobody else.
And her face was striking. Well, and to his credit, it was him that came up with the whole using the same troupe in different characters, and that's what everybody loves about Dark Shadows, you know. And even in the future, when Roger says, really, Countess, I think you should be able to recognize, and Julia's like, what? I'm not French. What? You know, they address it. You know, it's that was to his, and that's what we love about Dark Shadows. The reuse of all of these actors over and over. The Wizard of Oz thing. It's the whole Wizard of Oz.
Right.
You were there too.
You were there, and you were there, and you were there. That's right. Yeah. So the 1795 thing was definitely a huge stroke of genius. But Grayson comes on. Then they go to a party at Grayson's house. And I think she put the bug in Dan's ear. So he pulled Sam Hall aside and said, how would you like to write for the show? And, you know, Sam said, I don't know. I really don't know. Don't ask me now. I don't want to say yes, and I don't want to say no. You know, call me on Monday and we'll talk about it. In that Truman Capote voice. That he has.
Flock of doves, flock of doves, flock of doves.
Close the window! Close the window!
Yes. Sam had a very effete quality about him. I mean, yeah. It's there, but I just love that he sounds like Truman Capote. Don't ask me now. I don't want to say yes, and I don't want to say no, and I'm really so tired of television people. But yeah, that's how we got. And his first episode is Grayson's meltdown in Tony Peterson's office.
That's Sam's.
That's Sam's first episode.
Oh wow!
Yeah, yeah.
He got to you. That whole monologue.
The Roger Collins wants it that badly. Oh, Roger. Oh, I wish it were Roger. Oh, I'm sorry. It's just, I just don't know what to do.
I'd love to have gotten into Tony Peterson's head. Like, what the hell kind of people are these?
And how did Jerry Lacey keep a straight face? It's one of his first episodes.
Oh God.
Well, but that's also the one where I told you, watch the blooper reel. They stop. She comes into the office. They do 3 lines, and Henry Kaplan goes, "Stop, start over," and she's like, "Why?"
Oh yeah, you can see that somewhere. I want to see that.
It's on YouTube. Wow. It's on YouTube. Yeah. It's on YouTube. We don't know whether this is apocryphal or not. The elders at the Dark Shadows festivals imparted this to a 12-year-old me, that allegedly she got into words with Dan about something. They got into a fight. And so Dan went back to the writers and said, "Oh, really? If she thinks she's that smart, let her handle a whole episode alone." And that was how her Home Alone episode was written. Now, don't blame the messenger. This is what I was told. It's never been denied or confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
That she and Dan had words, and he said, "Great. She thinks she's so smart. Let her let her do the whole thing on her own."
And part of my French,
She showed him.
She acts the fuck out of that episode.
Yeah, she showed him.
Yeah.
She's brilliant. Grayson's absolutely brilliant.
What's interesting is that, he goes to Frid, he gives him a handful of mail, and Frid thinks he's going to fire him, and it turns out to be fan mail. Then it turns into 5,000 letters a week. They had to hire a special company to handle all the fan mail. But Frid is saying to him, "You've got to bring in another spook. Somebody to, hey, Nuggy. Say hi, Nugs. That's Joshua. He's going to audition for Joshua."
Gonna hear that loud screech.
Nuggy wants to audition for Joshua for the reboot. And they bring in Adam, which, like I've said, is one of my least favorite storylines. Not one of my favorites. But Quentin was another stroke of genius. Interesting, though, he hated werewolves. Dan did not like werewolves, and he said, "I resisted it as long as I could, but I had to give in and do a werewolf storyline." And I think it's one of the best storylines.
Oh my God, yeah.
He didn't like werewolves as just, like, scared of them as a kid?
He said it was hokey.
Oh, interesting.
He found it to be hokey. So he really railed against the werewolf storyline.
There was so much in that werewolf storyline. And so in like the whole, I love the fact that Barnabas is a kindred, feels like a kindred spirit with oh my God, I think I'm having a mini stroke. What the hell? Tim,
God forbid.
the brothers.
Oh, Chris and Tom.
Right. I love that he feels that like sort of kindred, I get it, man. And that he doesn't tell him. He doesn't tell him why. He just tells him, "Let's get you locked up," or whatever. I love all of that.
We have to stop for a second because literally so many people are saying this. You do a great Julia. Carmen Cruz. Hello, Carmen. Let's see here.
I'll say this. Stay tuned, Carmen.
Cloud
if you
Lily.
enjoyed that, stay tuned.
Wow, what a Julia you do. Bravo. And then guess who just joined? We love you, love you, love you, love you, love you.
Eddie!
Eddie Lucas.
I hope you're feeling good. Eddie.
We were talking about you earlier. Hope you're doing okay. We love you.
Eddie is one of our faithful and a very dear friend. So we love you, Eddie. I hope you're feeling better. The werewolf. We were talking about the werewolf. He thought they were hokey.
Oh my goodness.
I'm going to get you to do it again before the show's over.
But they gave in and it worked. And I mean, David Selby, my God, he went like Jonathan. He went through the roof.
Now, keep me honest here. The introduction of David Selby as Quentin, how much of that was at the request of Jonathan? He wanted a break, or what was that?
Well, he said you need someone Jonathan was doing almost 5 shows a week. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So he's like, and they did Adam. I just think Adam didn't go the way they hoped it would.
I love Adam. For what reason, kids?
Because we get Eve.
Marie Wallace.
We get Eve. And Nicholas obviously comes into that, and Nicholas was a great villain.
Terrific.
But and then everyone's like, he disappeared? What happened? Well, he asked Dan Curtis for a raise. That's why he disappeared.
Get in the closet.
Oh boy.
Sayonara, sayonara, Adam.
And in real life, we should mention very tall man.
Oh, like six. I think he was 6'3", 6'4".
Every
Yeah,
bit of it, and sweet.
sweet, funny, nice guy. Robert Rodan was a very, very nice guy.
And to mention something about Mr. Selby, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this before. I am from Baltimore, and my mother and father were contemporaries of Dark Shadows. And my mother, who was not a fan, watches it for me. She told me that they had to helicopter David Selby out of Baltimore at a parade. I think it was an All-American Day parade, which we all did in Baltimore. We always went to those. They had to move him, so he did fit the bill. He was that extra spook. He did very well.
And he, how did that happen? Where he said, he just got a call. He got a call from Marion Doherty, who was one of the head casting ladies. And so I went up and they said, bring a scene. And he had a scene partner from acting class. And they did a scene from Summer and Smoke. He said, there's Dan with his green carpet with the golf balls, because he would putt. He would be putting golf balls while people were auditioning. And that was it. And a little side note here, this is not too well known, but, one of the most beloved actors on the show is Joel Crothers, because Joe Haskell was a good guy, and, he was the All-American. He was so handsome. And when we get to 1795, initially the arc seemed to be that he was going to be Victoria's love interest and her savior. And I think Joel went to the writers and said, please, give me something else to play. And so he becomes this rogue, this dastardly, unscrupulous, delicious villain who gets it in the end, comes back, now he's Joe again, and he apparently heard about Quentin and went to Dan and said, I'd like to play Quentin.
Oh, wow.
So, and Dan was like, no, we're trying to find a new actor. I'm sorry. And that's what I've been told is why Joe left the show.
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
But, I mean, you can't imagine anybody other than David Selby, but I do think that Joel could have pulled it off.
Yeah.
I would just like to do a shout out to Joel in those white pants. Okay, back to the show. Okay.
We love seeing Joel Crothers in those gabardine pants. Yes, we do.
My goodness.
And Keith Prentice. They left very little to the imagination. Yes.
All right, thank you. Now, fast forward. Didn't Jonathan pull David aside years later and say, I was a little bit jealous of you?
When they went to do the movie, the Johnny Depp movie, when they went to do their cameo, and you can listen to this online, but they were sitting at a table at the hotel, and apparently he pulled David aside and he said, I have to admit, I was always just a little bit jealous of you. And David said there was never any trace of that. They got along so well. He loved working with Jonathan. On the set, there was never any idea of... although I think in his own way, Jonathan was kind of like, careful what you wish for.
I'm sure.
Because, now they were... Although, and I love David, this is nothing against David. When Jonathan is gone too long, the show kind of, it loses something.
When he's locked in that coffin.
Or staked.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It definitely, you feel his absence.
There's a beautiful letter that David Selby wrote when he died that you can listen to on YouTube that he reads out loud to Jonathan. It's absolutely beautiful.
Very sweet. Yeah. Very sweet. Very, very sweet. Curtis was doing other projects during all of this. He did a wonderful... Because I believe ABC wanted to make Dark Shadows into a nighttime series at one point.
Oh, wow.
68, 69, I think they toyed with the idea of instead of daytime, it would be a nighttime show. And Dan then went and did a pilot called A Darkness That Blazed In. Marge Dusay was the heroine. Thayer David is the groundskeeper, and Louis Edmonds is the ghost. And I forget the two gentlemen that play these paranormal investigators, but one of the guys who auditioned for the role was Michael Stroka, didn't get it, and then they brought him in to play Aristide.
Aristide. Oh, wow.
But if you've never seen Darkness That Blazed In, it's really good. I believe you can watch it for free on YouTube. And
Can, yeah.
it
Really quickly, I want to do a shout out. Mark Willoughby Wood has joined us. Mark is a very, very talented entertainer, but writer in his own right. He wanted to remind us that Eddie co-authored Mark's book on Bewitched.
yes.
So, and we have your book, Mark. And in fact, Peter and I live in Salem, Massachusetts, and so welcome, Mark. So good to see you. So.
Yes, Eddie and I have been talking. I'm gonna do a Mac and chat with Eddie about the book. So we're gonna talk about that book, absolutely. Then they get an offer to do a movie, and I've got to go back and check the history on this. If MGM approached Dan Curtis, or if Dan Curtis approached MGM. That's a piece of history that's not jiving in my mind. I'm trying to remember how that all worked. But it was already in talks in 1968, and did not get made until 1970. But again, Dan wanted that Barnabas that he had always envisioned. He also wanted a much slicker, bloodier, scarier movie and story all the way around, and that's what he got. And I believe that he was truly inspired by the Hammer films. We've talked about this, Michael. I mean, there's no way he had to be inspired by the Hammer films.
I was going to say earlier when we were talking about that honestly, Dan Curtis's I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. So Carl just said it was Dan indeed who approached MGM. So sorry.
Thank you, Carl.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
Thank you. I love Vincent Price. I love all of this stuff, but Vincent Price's the AI movies aside, Curtis's work was much closer to a Hammer. Not just they were both, I guess, gothic, but he had Hammer had a way with physical violence, and Curtis's work was much closer to what you saw in a Hammer film than the AI movies. The AI movies were gentler and more poetic and all that kind of thing, but the Hammer thing and Curtis were neck and neck. I mean, it was the physical, the way he would throw the vampire through the people around, and then Dracula. Doesn't Jack Palance fight a lion or something crazy in Dracula? Or there's a scene where something jumps on him, or maybe I'm imagining that. I feel like there's some.
It's been a while since I've seen it. I'll watch it around Halloween time. Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta look at it. But something strange. But it's that he's brilliant, and you're absolutely right. So close, especially the Dark Shadows movies.
Very much so. Very much so. And he predicted it was going to be a hit, and he was right. I mean, it made the studio. It was one of 3 movies that got MGM out of bankruptcy. The problem was he pissed off his leading man, his cash cow, because Jonathan was really embarrassed by the film. Yeah. He just did not like it, and they said, well, we're going to make another one, and we're going to give you a bigger budget. And Dan calls him into the office, and he says, I'm not doing it. And that's when everything went south.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't want to be typecast as that kind of a vampire, meaning the movie vampire.
Right.
He never said, I don't want to play Barnabas anymore, albeit he would have preferred to have stayed human as Barnabas. And it led to such dissension that Curtis fired him, but contractually he was required to honor his contract.
Mm-hmm.
And Jonathan comes in one day and finds out he's playing a new character in a few weeks called Bromwell. He never asked to play that role. And for years, Jonathan allowed people to think that. That was very gentlemanlike of him.
Yeah, extremely.
But yeah, Curtis was being, I mean, God love him. We love you, Dan, but he was being a big baby. Well, he doesn't have to want to play Barnabas anymore. He doesn't have to play Barnabas anymore.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. And apparently, once ABC found out that he let Jonathan go, they canceled the show.
Don't
Because
shit where you eat, people.
the ratings were back on an upsweep.
The ratings had gone, well, the violence of the movie took their audience away for a few weeks.
I'm not going to let you watch this. This is the kind of thing you watch at home, right?
But apparently, 1841 Parallel Time, the ratings all of a sudden went up again.
Mm-hmm.
But it was too late at that point, and it seemed to me that Curtis and Frid did not end on good terms. As a matter of fact, I think Frid did not go to the wrap party.
Oh, really? For the movie or the series?
For the series.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Yeah,
I know he was doing a play at the time. He was doing double duty and doing, is it Murder at the Cathedral? Famous play.
Beckett?
Is that it?
Maybe, I don't know. I feel like Beckett came up at some point.
But he did not attend the wrap party.
Oh, that work is not so sad. And being the bloodline of the
Jonathan
series.
Frid was indeed in Murder in the Cathedral in 1971.
That's it.
T.S. Eliot.
Is that where he played? What did he play? The Cardinal, right?
Yes.
He played the Cardinal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that, we'll have our own little Night of Dark Shadows discussion. I know there are the people that love it, and they blame the cuts, and I'm not saying the cuts, although Nancy Barrett, swear to God, Nancy said this to me when we were doing a show together for 8 weeks. She said, Peter, it was a bad movie before they cut all those scenes.
Oh my God! Can I just say something about her?
Yeah.
Really quickly.
Yep.
Since we were talking about the whole Tony Peterson thing and those episodes, how cool was she? How friggin' sexy was it of her? How sexy was she when they're having their initial, they're flirting back and forth, and he's telling her, you're not my type. You're a rich girl, and she turns to him and says. And I really think perhaps Laura Parker would be the only other female in the show I think that could have pulled this off. She said, I'm not going to change who I am. You're going to change who you are or whatever. And she's like, and you're going to take me to dinner and all that. I thought, how cool, how wonderfully, how beautiful that scene she did in that scene and how sexy she was when she turned around. Her eyes were wicked. It was really, she was a damn good actress. Is still with us, thank God.
Peter and I talk about this. Actress. This is Peter and I talk about this all the time. Is that she's perhaps, if not the most talented female on the show, one of the most talented female on the show, right. And clearly the most underrated actress.
Nancy and Johnny Carlin, I think, had the most range, and also Thayer David.
Yes, yeah,
absolutely,
because he had such a distinct voice and a look, yet he could become those characters,
right,
and make you believe that they were all different. They were all different. Yep. Do you have a comment?
You don't get.
Yeah, Nick wants to add that yes, House of Dark Shadows, absolutely, to put a stake in the show, but he also thinks that the fact that he felt that he had to compete with the Hammer films, that's really what made it went south, and the parents did indeed say I'm not going to let you watch this anymore.
Agreed, Nick. Yeah, absolutely. And I think those cut scenes that allegedly destroy Night of Dark Shadows, I think there are, in 2 words, we can sum up why Night of Dark Shadows didn't do well. Jonathan Frid.
Yeah.
No Barnabas, no movie.
That's what Carl pointed out a little bit earlier.
I just think, and again, it's not to denigrate David Selby at all. We love David, we love Laura.
Oh no.
Great cast, but I think people saw the trailers and was like, where's Barnabas?
Right.
So
Like,
I wouldn't put all the blame on the cuts. I think they didn't make their money back because a lot of people just didn't go to see it because there was no Jonathan Frid.
I do want to say too that Peter Cushing, more than once, and I think Christopher Lee too, said that when Hammer went that route of way too much blood, way less acting and boobs and sex, that was when the light started to go out on Hammer. That's not. People go to see these things because of the acting. They don't know it. A lot of times they don't realize it, but there's something in the acting that makes the film so much better than just the guts and the blood and the boobs and God knows what else, and both of them fell victim to the same thing.
Yeah.
Peter and I own Dan Curtis's personal copy, one sheet of the Night of Dark Shadows poster that hung in Dan's office.
Yeah, if there are any fans out there, we're downsizing. We have we bring this up almost every week, but we have Dan's original Night of Dark Shadows poster from his office, as well as there were several different versions. His favorite of Burnt Offerings.
Oh wow!
So we're going to be unloading those. So if anyone's interested, DM us.
Fully framed, under glass.
Yeah.
Very, very thick wooden black lacquer frame. We can send you pictures for those of you who are interested.
Yeah.
And I used to own, oddly enough, I won many things of Dan Curtis's over the years. And I can't believe I sold this.
Quinto.
But I used, exactly right. I used to own Dan Curtis's personal address book. And I sold it a few years ago to a fan.
Paid quite a bit of bucks for it.
I did.
But we had all of the phone numbers. I mean, they weren't living there anymore, but it wasn't just, I think Al Pacino was in the address book as well.
He was indeed.
There were or Robert De Niro. Yeah, there were, but we had the address. Well, I will say this, before we sold it, we photocopied it. So yes. we have a photocopy of it somewhere.
I'll find it and make you a copy, Mike.
But yeah, like Laura lived down on 14th Street in Chelsea, and David Selby's address. That was kind of fun. But I just think it's sad. I think if he hadn't been such a hard hat with Jonathan, one, I think we could have gotten another 2 years out of the series at least. And if the movie had gone in another direction, I think we could have gotten at least 3 or 4 Dark Shadows movies if it had just not gone the way it went.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine if the 1795 had been a movie?
Which is what they said it was supposed to be, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Michael, go ahead.
No, I wasn't. I think as a Night of Dark Shadows bears very little resemblance to, other than the familiar faces. Angelique, for me, Angelique is the heavy because she's always trying to get Barnabas, right? But she's not evil. I never saw her as, in the beginning you kind of do, when she's killing Sarah and she's trying to wipe it. But then, the character, she's not as dark as the Angelique in this movie. It's a whole other thing about a witch. It shouldn't be called Dark Shadows to me. The end was very clever. The end when you think that they've gotten away and you find that they didn't, that's very spooky. But it just doesn't feel like, and I'm looking and I'm like, oh, that's Quentin, that's Angelique, that's Daphne, but it's not, and it does, and that's Willie, and that's Carolyn, but it's too different to be Dark Shadows to me.
Well, and then I'll never forget when it was on TNT, they did a double bill, House and Night,
Yeah,
and the MGM lion roars, and you're hearing what was Joanna's theme on the television series, which I love. It's beautiful, but you're like, wait a minute, where's the theme? And for me, it pulled me right out the gate.
exactly.
I'm like, where's the music? We'll get into
Right.
that. We'll get into that more for Night of Dark Shadows.
Yeah.
He was a genius. Dracula with Jack Palance, fantastic. One of my favorite adaptations of the story. Stole a little bit of the Barnabas Josette thing.
Mm.
And he wound up suing Francis Ford Coppola in 1992 for
Right.
stealing from him. Um, Picture Dorian Gray. I mean, all of it. And again, The Night Stalker, brilliant. Night Strangler, fabulous. The Norliss tapes, I saw that for the first time last year. It's got a Kolchak feeling to it, but it's great. It's so good. If you've never seen the Norliss tapes, you got to see the Norliss tapes. Good stuff.
There's a
The
few things
war
I've
movie,
What was that, honey?
the Winds of War,
Oh, Winds of War,
and
War
War
and
and
Remembrance,
Remembrance.
which
War and Remembrance. That's it.
the depiction of the Holocaust. Somebody has gone on, and I'm glad they didn't take it down. They took out all of the Holocaust moments and they made their own separate movie out of it because the way he depicts, I mean, you need a box, you need 2 boxes of Kleenex.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. The man really was a genius. So,
And influenced. We can't say enough about how much he influenced. I saved this in preparation for today, but Stephen King says specifically that The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is the sole reason, the sole inspiration for his novel The Shining. And
Oh wow.
he says specifically Curtis's ability to create psychological tension and horror within a domestic setting resonated with me, and I sat down and started writing the next day.
Grayson pointed out, I haven't seen Jekyll and Hyde in a while because it's pretty long.
Yeah.
And also, guys, if you didn't know, that's what Quentin's theme was written for. It was written for Jekyll and Hyde, and Curtis went to Cobert and said, "I need a gramophone song for this new spook." And Cobert was like, "Sounds kind of corny. I don't really feel like writing anything like that. How about the song I wrote for Billy Whitelaw and Jekyll and Hyde? Why don't we just redo that?" So that's how we got Quentin's theme, which got an award. It was like the most from the broadcasting, radio broadcasting, that it was like the most played piece of music.
Oh, my friend's grandmother was a missionary. God love her, and she actually would watch Dark Shadows because of Quentin's theme.
That's
They
amazing.
were strict. In other words, they didn't celebrate Halloween, but she'd watch Dark Shadows. The theme was like a Dr. Zhivago sort of, and that turned her on. It's just wild.
But it's true about the films. His films are very psychological. Certainly, well, Burnt Offerings, he does rip off Night of Dark Shadows, particularly the ending. But if you're going to steal from yourself. Yeah, psychological seem to be his, and Night of Dark Shadows is very psychological.
But we also need to recognize, I don't want this episode to go away without mentioning his last directorial effort, 2001, which was Our Fathers, which was
About the pedophilia.
in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And it's so brilliantly done. And there are it's certainly psychological, but it dealt with such a controversial topic that many attribute that film to the people in Boston being able to recoup and get some recognition and recompense for the horror that they dealt with. So amazing, just an amazingly talented body of work.
Well, and again, the man knew his way around monsters. Here he dealt with the Nazis.
Yeah.
corrupt priests. I mean, you're going down the same, the same kind of rabbit hole in a sense. You're just dealing with real life monsters versus the fictitious ones.
And what a cast there. Christopher Plummer.
And he
You knew how
did
to
do a wonderful job with the NBC Dark Shadows, and he really got screwed over. Warren Littlefield
We all
really,
did.
we all got screwed over because we'll be watching it in a few weeks. We watch it every Halloween. We binge watch it. We're going to do a whole episode about it. As I said, Penny Dreadful just did one. I really, really enjoyed the 1991 series, and
I love it.
he was on to something. He really was on to something. He got screwed over. I don't know how many of you have seen the 2004 pilot. There's a murky version of it on YouTube. We saw it when it was aired at the festivals for screening purposes only. They never finished it. It was a little too rushed. But again, they were kind of sort of on to something. I wish that something had happened with that show. But
And one of Peter's crushes played Willie Loomis
Matt Zuckery plays Willie Loomis.
from Gilmore Girls.
Yep. And apparently Burke Devlin was going to be a character in that series.
Oh, interesting.
He wasn't in the 91 series, but he was going to be in the 2004 series. And Johnny Carlin was being courted to play Sam Evans if the show had been picked up.
Can you imagine?
Also, Curtis wanted to, I guess, bury the hatchet. He wanted Jonathan Frid to play Joshua to Ben Cross's Barnabas Collins.
Really?
Yeah, and apparently Jonathan said no way. He didn't want to work with him. Again, someone like Mary O'Leary could shed more light on that. I had heard it was just that Jonathan was not over the hurt, and that's why he didn't want to do it. But they also considered Louis Edmonds to come back and play Joshua again for the 91 series.
He would have been perfect, obviously.
Yeah, that would have been. He'd have been a perfect age. He'd have aged into the character.
Yeah. Yeah. Stefan Garash did a wonderful job as Joshua.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But
a lot of people don't know this, but every year at the festivals, especially in the latter years, all of the auction items, all of the money went to Alzheimer's disease research. Dan Curtis's wife Norma was afflicted with Alzheimer's.
He did that movie.
That.
He did that movie. I can't, the title escapes me. I think it was his last television movie. Norma apparently went into full throttle Alzheimer's, and Dan felt lost without her. And John did some research a couple of months back. Apparently, he knew he had a brain tumor.
Saving Millie.
Saving Millie is the movie. Yes. And that was in honor of Norma that he made that film. But he had a brain tumor, and he apparently called his daughters and said, "I'm going into hospice." And they said, What do you mean you're going in? He felt lost without Norma. He didn't want to live. That's how much he loved his wife. And he was gone a few weeks. I think he died just a few weeks after Norma passed away.
So there is that tender side.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Carrie wants us to know that Dan also directed an Alzheimer's TV movie called Do You Remember Love, starring Joanne Woodward and Richard Kiley. So,
I want to see that. I've never seen that. John and I, we've raised, since 2015, we've raised over $48,000 for the Boston University Alzheimer's Disease Center. So, because my grandma had it, who raised me. And so we do it in her memory. And we actually did a Halloween event with Marie Wallace and Donna Wandry back in 2018. It was called Shadows Over Halloween. And they told scary stories. And then I joined them. We did a reading of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
It was brilliant.
and they did a Q&A, and which we have to put the Q&A up. We've got to upload that. And we're hoping, actually, for those of you out there, I'm going to throw this out there. We don't have Dark Shadows conventions anymore. They just did a wonderful event in LA. They're doing a Frid event in Tarrytown, but we were thinking we'd like to have fan get-togethers for the fans and by the fans and help raise money for BU80C. I wonder how many of you out there would be interested if we put together an
East Coast fan
event to benefit this great organization. How many of you would come? And, it would just be a day of Dark Shadows fans getting together and doing all things DS. We wouldn't infringe on, the regular Dark Shadows stuff. That's their thing. But I don't know. What do you think, Michael?
I'm in.
Good.
We also want to give a shout out to Mary O'Leary and them showing the documentary at Tarrytown Music Hall. We also want to...
Don't miss it. That's going to be October 12th. Saturday, October 12th at the Tarrytown Music Hall. A screening of the Jonathan Frid documentary with Marie Wallace, Donna Wandry, and Sharon Smith-Lentz. They'll be there signing autographs, Q&A, so go check that out.
And he won't tell you this, but as the tooting my husband's horn, the staff at Lyndhurst actually called Peter and wanted him to do a tour that morning at Lyndhurst.
Well, we had talked about...
We wanted to thank them so much for inviting Peter to do it.
Yeah.
But it would be impossible for us to get there from Salem, but we appreciate the phone call.
Yeah, no, we had talked about that. So it didn't work out, but it would have been fun. But yeah, don't miss the Frid event if you're on the East Coast. Go check that out.
Individual tickets go on sale in 10 days.
Closing thoughts about Dan Curtis, Michael.
I'm grateful for him. I think he was a brilliant producer, and he had this massive entrepreneurial mind that never seemed to slow up, always looking for the next thing. Of course, we're defensive because we love Jonathan Frid, because we're biased to love Jonathan Frid. So of course we're going to be in defense of our guy, but I acknowledge his genius, and I'm grateful that he gave us all that he gave us, not just Dark Shadows, Trilogy of Terror, and all the fun growing up. So I'm grateful for him.
John.
The body of work. Certainly Dark Shadows, and thus we wouldn't be talking today. We wouldn't have met Michael, certainly. But the body of work we just discussed. Everything from all of his horror influence, Night Stalker, Night Strangler, all the way through Our Fathers, and the Emmy Award-winning both Winds of War and War of Remembrance. I mean, just such a diaspora of work, just an amazing body of work. And, Dan said it himself. My obituary is going to say the creator of Dark Shadows, but we celebrate that tonight, but certainly he had so much more in his canon that changed, really, the face of entertainment. You, babe?
Well, I think it's something that you just said. He said, I'm probably going to be remembered for Dark Shadows and not the things that I really care about, like Winds of War and War and Remembrance. And he said, it's a strange feeling to be the guy that created Dark Shadows. And I hope it's going to live forever. Maybe it'll live forever. I think this is proof positive that Dark Shadows is going to live forever. What we're doing, what Penny Dreadful, Danielle does, Eteria Collinwood, Between the Shadows, Resident of Collinwood, Collinsport After Dark, Dark Shadows Every Day. I mean, between all of the different podcasts and the Facebook pages. And, we're constantly celebrating this show, praying for this sequel series to come to fruition. Even some of us would love to see a reboot. So I don't think you're ever going to close the lid. You're never going to close the coffin lid on Dark Shadows. And I'm just grateful that he gave me, and I'm just one of, I think, millions. It's it saved me as an adolescent. Um, the show saved me because I could escape into that world where all of these oddballs were the cool kids. I was the outsider, I was the outcast, but Barnabas and Julia and Quentin and Angelique, they were the odd ones and yet they were the cool ones. So I'll always be, we would not have Dark Shadows if it had not been for Dan Curtis. So for such an important part of my childhood that's carried on to, you know, being in my 40s, I'll always be grateful for that and all the rest of it. And all the rest of it. So we raise our Wolfie to you, Mr. Curtis, wherever you are.
And to answer your question, so many people are weighing in. Gay, we haven't said hello to you tonight, but would love a Dark Shadows fan event. So I've counted 12 comments so far of people who want a Dark Shadows fan event on the East Coast.
We would love to do that. Great. So please keep those comments coming in because we've been talking about this, and I know there are some private parties and stuff like that happen, but we want to get something where we could get a whole bunch of people together and celebrate the show. Again, not impinging or infringing on any of the more authorized stuff, just for the fans and by the fans. We think that would be great. And hopefully even Mr. Curtis would approve from that big studio up in the sky. We will be back later this week with a new episode. Don't ask me what it is as yet. Swishing the ideas around. And there is a subsidiary to this show, which, fingers crossed, in the next 7 days, 10 days tops, will be making a debut. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, keep watching Dark Shadows, Amazon, Tubi, wherever it's playing. And have a wonderful week, guys.
Good night, guys. Much love.
Good night.
And you, my friend.